Hi, I'm Paris here with my brother Aaron. Say hey.
Hey guys.
Here with the second episode of 5 Ways to Friday. We got some interesting topics today. We're going to focus on some AI themed things first. All right, going to
Nice.
throw it to my brother here to start us off with the first AI topic.
All right, so this is a topic I've been seeing more and more stuff on recently. The phenomenon of AI and basically how that is affecting the younger generation, specifically Generation Alpha. You got some Gen Z, so maybe some of this will be something you can relate to a little bit with the kids, but more so, this is about the generation that grew up with social media and the internet since they were right out of the crib, some of them starting at 2 or 3 years old, and the impact that that's having on their brain, cognitive functions, social, maybe EQ type things, and just the effect it's having even on their personality, things like that. So first, to legitimize the idea of brain rot, let's go ahead and take a look at what Oxford Dictionary says and how they define it.
Okay.
All right. So we can see from here that this was actually Oxford's word of the year. So I don't know if that means it's a great thing or a bad thing, but it's basically defined as a supposed deterioration of a person's mental and intellectual state. If we're going to basically take a look and accept the fact that brain rot is a new phenomenon that's going on, especially affecting the youngest generation. So what is it exactly? The idea is basically that because of the fact that kids have started on to the internet and social media at such an early age, that is basically going to be affecting the way their brain develops. And I think millennials were probably the last generation, along with Gen X and boomers, of course, even later, but they saw the internet come to be during their lifetime. So they were sort of out of that developmental stage. So although it may impact our lives in other ways, it's not necessarily impacting the development of our brain, social skills, things like that. Where this youngest generation, they've never known a world that didn't have the internet. And I think some of it does have to do with the parenting as well, because I think it is an easy way to keep your kids quiet, to keep them busy, while you're doing stuff. So you tend to give them a game or something on the tablet without really thinking of maybe the long-term consequences that's going to have on them. We've discussed before about how social media now, with going with the short-term videos, kind of getting shorter and shorter, that it's affecting the attention span of kids. I think when you and I had started YouTube 15 years ago, a short video was considered like 5 to 10 minutes long. And that was kind of where we focused most of our videos at that time. So that seemed like it was a short video. I liked it when I was watching, the early comedic creators like Jenna Marbles or Daily Grace, because I could watch an entire video on my break at work. So if I had a 10-minute break, I could watch the entire video. If something was longer than 10 minutes, I didn't want to get started because I knew I wouldn't be able to finish it. But now 10 minutes, I think, is really pressing the attention span of a lot of these kids now.
That's a major motion picture these days.
Especially the YouTube channels that are specifically intended for kids really seem to play into that. There's one called Coco Melon, I believe. That's the biggest kids channel on YouTube. I think it has like 160 million subscribers and billions of views. But it's those kind of short, quick, repetitive type things, whether it's the lyrics to that song or whether it's just the segments within the video itself. None of them are longer than 3 seconds, whether that's the visual shot or somebody talking. It has to be changed that quick. So every angle goes to a new scene, the next thing. So how is that impacting kids' ability to sustain actual conversations, to relate to other people in the real world? And I do think there's definitely an addictive aspect to social media, the way they feed you the reels, the swiping of them. It reminds me a lot of sort of pulling the handle on a casino slot machine. I could definitely see how this would be having more of an impact on young kids who are still in the developmental phase of their brain, social skills, things like that. Then maybe it impacted you or I or even your kids' generation who were already at a certain level of development before they really got deep into that. I actually asked AI to create a picture representing the phenomena of brain rot, basically. And I thought it was kind of interesting what they came up with. So maybe we can take a look at that. So as you guys can see here, almost a sort of frightening type of depiction. So this is what AI felt like was a representation of the phenomenon of brain rot. I thought it was interesting the way they sort of took a very dystopian, almost Great Depression type of a feel to it, but then added the screens and the tablet in front of the kid. It reminds me a lot of the one, remember, with the kid, "Can I have some more?"
Oh, yes. Charles Dickens.
Oliver Twist, right?
Yep.
Yeah, so it's like, "Can I have some more?" But he's not talking about soup. He's talking about the tablet, or the social media. The kid looks like he's in poverty, the disheveled room. Almost seems like the AI intuitively took the brain rot being created from either, AI or social media, the internet, and almost intuitively tied it into poverty and loss of jobs and things like that. So I don't know how intentional that was, but I thought it was an interesting kind of creative interpretation of the phenomena of brain rot. But I did get a video clip that I felt like was interesting, kind of represented the issue from a couple of parents' perspective, and then a little bit of a news story clip about the phenomenon.
We cannot raise a generation of kids that are this tuned out, that are this rude, that are this violent.
I teach 7th grade. They are still performing on the 4th grade level.
Parts of the brain related to reading, language, and decision-making are often weaker in kids who have more screen time.
This shrinking of the brain is what we call brain rot, and by the time parents notice, it's already too late.
That is sort of the worst fears of brain rot, almost manifesting in an actual physical shrinking of the brain itself or certain areas of the brain. So what do you think? Do you think it's just urban myth? Do you think it's hyperbole? Do you think there's some real basis to this affecting an entire generation of kids?
Yeah, every generation thinks the up-and-coming generation, they look down on them. But maybe there is something more to this if they've actually done studies that have MRIs that showed actual physical differences in the brain. Then, there's no arguing with that if you can actually see the differences. But I know when smartphones first came out, and I didn't get one right away, but when I got my first smartphone, it wasn't worrying that the kids were not paying attention. It was that I was not paying attention. Because there are so many interesting things you can do. So you take the kid to the playground. I remember my younger one was still wanting to be pushed on the swing kind of thing. But I caught myself on the phone reading a thing or watching something and pushing with the one hand. I thought, oh my gosh, this is not good. This is not how it's supposed to be, where you're not even there in the time that you spend with the kids. So
it is interesting though. So take your experience where you felt like you couldn't be present with your kids while you were on, and then imagine that same phenomenon with kids who are growing up with that and not being present all the time from the time they're very young.
Their whole life.
Yeah. So I'm with you on the idea that, is this just the older generation criticizing the younger generation? Are we seeing less developed areas of the brain that are possibly being replaced with more developed areas of the brain? Do we know that yet? You remember as well as I do from the 80s, the boob tube. And that was going to rot everybody's brain. Remember our father? Yeah, he hated that. Everybody. And so to a certain degree, I think it's true, because you're not interacting, you're not participating, you're just sitting there and having something being fed to you almost. You're being spoon fed, whatever happens to be on the TV. Although I do feel like the shows back then, the Barney Millers, WKRPs, MASH, were much better than the garbage they got with the internet now. So I feel like there was a little bit more maybe of thought-provoking, or things. But anyway, that may just be a generational bias. But I do think it's definitely something to be concerned about. And it does bring me back to thinking of the movie Idiocracy.
Oh, yeah.
I believe that was in the early 2000s it came out. Now, the whole idea with that was that the people who should least be having kids, they're having all these kids, while doctors and lawyers, they're saying, oh, we're going to think about it and we'll wait. Maybe they have one kid. Maybe they don't end up having kids at all. So generation after generation, with the dumbest and worst people having kids, that the intelligence, the IQ of the entire race basically would decline. And I think that movie was set for 500 years in the future. So after enough generations, this is what we became, where I almost think it's not going to take that long because they didn't factor in the rise of social media and the internet. And so I'm almost wondering if that brain rot could actually, if the generation alpha is going to be 30% stupider than their parents' generation, then what chance are their kids going to have? So I feel like we weren't as smart in a lot of ways or as engaged as our father's generation. So I think he had some point to TV having a negative, effect. So I would have to think there, at least on some level, is something to it. But it'll be interesting to see as more studies are done, if you really do see, however many liters a brain is on average, they do the comparison of a human brain to an ape's, a chimp's, that if we really did start to see a shrinking of brain size of the youngest generation, like I said, we could be at the idiocracy point very quickly in a generation or two.
Could be evolution. We don't need the brains anymore because the AI is going to do all the thinking for us. So the brains just shrivel up and go away.
That's the interesting thing, because it does seem like this phenomena is curtail, or it's riding right in on the wave of the rise of AI. So as we get too dumb to do things, AI takes over. Now, we both have talked about, we thought that Google Maps, and before that it was TomTom or whatever, but people's reliance on that really did something to that part of your brain to where you become dependent on it very quickly, and you can no longer remember how to find places or get anywhere. And I find myself, even if it's a place I've been to 5 times, I still find myself putting it in because I didn't think about where I was going the other 4 times I was there. Because I'm just following, turn left here, turn right there. You're not having to consciously think about where you're going. It's just like television or the internet. It's just information that's being fed to you that you're sort of a passive receiver in. So I definitely think there is something to it, whether it's going to destroy society or be the next big fear, or whether it's just something we use to criticize the young generation. I guess that'll have to be seen as things play out. So
okay, are we ready to move on to the next topic, also AI related?